I added some, I guess you could call it nightmare fuel to my head this week as I came across this story of these scam artists who will use social media and AI and clone the voice of kids. So they'll have these voice clips or whatever, and they'll take the voices of your kids and they'll clone those voices. And then when they know, because of social media, that your kids are out of the house, they will call parents with your kid's voice saying, "Mom, Dad, I made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry." And the line cuts off, and it's this scam artist that says, the scam artist that says, "Hey, we've got your child. Unless you wire us $30,000 right now, we're going to kill them. Don't hang up. Don't call the cops." And so people are actually sending tens of thousands of dollars as a result of these scams because they hear it's their kid's voice. It's terrifying, I know. Turns out their kid was at school or at a friend's house the whole time. We live in an age where it is harder and harder all the time to discern and discover what is true, what is right, what is good, what around us can we trust. There are scam artists all over. There are deep fakes everywhere. One of the things I've seen lately is people posting just absolute fake news. They'll post it on social media to get people to click it. It's everywhere. We have to discern and use, is this a deep fake? What around us is true? Add to that the political skew of truth where different sides will take one event and completely change it sort of to meet their own ends. And we continually have to ask ourselves, what is actually the truth? A year ago, we decided it was time for us to get a dog. And so we had a specific breed that we wanted to get. And so I found this site with the perfect dog. It was so cute, and the shipping was great, and it was the right dog. It was the right fit. And just as I'm about ready to put my information in the website, I go, there's this thing in the back of my mind that goes, you should probably double check. This is a pretty good deal. And so sure enough, it didn't take a whole lot of research to find out that this is a complete scam website. And it's actually a thing. These fake dog websites are a thing. And so when we eventually did find another more reputable source, I did tons of research. I was actually nervous the whole time. Jen didn't believe the dog was real until the first time it actually peed on our carpet. But we're constantly bombarded with information, and we have to go, what is true? What is the truth? And when it comes to our faith, it's also a pretty important question. How do we know what we know to be true? How do we know that Jesus wasn't a con artist, that the disciples weren't just scamming people? How do we know this to be true? Because sometimes we can't see things personally, right? You're about to buy something on Facebook Marketplace, again, a source of a lot of scam. You can't see it. Physically, you can't touch it. With these websites we're buying things from, we rely on the testimony, the eyewitness, the reviews of other people. When it comes to our faith, how do we trust that what we know is true? We live in a culture around us that wants to not discuss our faith, but to dismiss it, to mock it, to ridicule, to say it's not even worth discussion. And it's normal to have doubt. Listen, our faith, maybe you grew up in church and you had all the flannel graphs and it's all just been like written into you since you were a kid. But if you stop and like remove yourself from Christian culture, our faith is kind of ridiculous. We believe that a lady had a virgin birth, right? Like not the, oh yeah, it's 7 months. It's just a really like big premature baby that happened 7 months after we got married, right? Like wink, wink, nod, nod. No, we're saying no, that they're a virgin birth, that Jesus, fully God, God the creator of the universe, took on flesh as a baby and entered into this tiny little town, Nazareth. And he proclaimed that he was God. He said he was God. He walked on water, did all these miracles. And then he was crucified. He was executed by the state. And 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And that same dude is now on the throne of the universe. And we worship him. Like, that's kind of a ridiculously absurd thing to think. It's not normal, okay? Don't be surprised when the world says that we're weird, because we kind of are. But we're not the first ones to go like, oh, now we're scientific and we understand. People don't rise from the dead. The disciples didn't believe it either. That they had walked with Jesus for 3 years. They had heard Jesus actually say, hey, by the way, 3 days after I die, I'm coming back again. And they still didn't get it. Jesus is murdered, and their first response is defeat. They're crushed, they're defeated, they're in despair. And Jesus shows up, and they still don't believe it at first, right? Because it's not normal. Yes, they didn't have the internet, and they didn't have cars, and they didn't have all this technology, but they understood death. In fact, Thomas, he wasn't there when Jesus showed up the first time. Thomas still doesn't believe. The disciples said, no, seriously, he was here. And he goes, I don't believe it. Here's what Thomas says in the Gospel of John. Now, Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said, unless I see his hands and the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the marks of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. Thomas says, this doesn't happen, guys. You guys are nuts. And sure enough, Jesus shows up to Thomas, and he goes, hey, Thomas, come check it out. But I think in my head, I was thinking of this week, usually it's like, oh, Thomas walks over, and he goes like, whoa, dude, no. It's like when somebody shows you a gnarly scar, and they peel back the bandage, right? Your response is like, ah. I can imagine Thomas just cringing and dry heaving as he touches this hole in Jesus' wrist. But sure enough, Jesus shows up, and Thomas touches him and feels him for himself, and his response is to go, my Lord and my God. He believes, and then Jesus says, blessed are those who also believe that don't get to see like you do. Listen, it is normal to have doubt. It's normal to go how do we know that this is true and not just crazy? The disciples thought the same thing. But Jesus showed up resurrected to 500 different people at different times and different places. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't their imagination. It wasn't myth. And in fact, the disciples wrote about it and proclaimed it. And that encounter with Jesus changed their whole life. And they went around proclaiming that Jesus was resurrected. And they were all murdered for that fact. That's how strongly they believed that they understood what truly had happened, even though it seemed insane. One of the amazing things about our faith is that it happens in history. It's not someone with magic spectacles in the forest going, I'm the only one that got to see this truth. You'll have to trust me. Right? It's not speculation. It's not a Buddha sitting in a closet coming up with, this is what I think life is. It happened in history. Another person that Jesus showed up to personally was this dude, Paul. Originally, his name was Saul, and he hated Christians. He went around and he would celebrate at Christian funerals. And he tried to make it illegal to be a Christian. And all of a sudden, one day, he's walking along this road when the resurrected Jesus shows up and has an encounter with Saul, and it absolutely changes everything. That he's so convinced that Jesus was, in fact, resurrected, that he was real, that he changed his name, and he became this opponent to Christians, to trying to create more Christians. And he went around the whole Mediterranean proclaiming that Jesus was, in fact, alive and God. Absolutely changed everything. And Paul's life is also this other witness that we can trust that something amazing happened with Jesus. And Paul coins this term that I think sums up our faith really, really well. And he steals it from culture. In that day, you would have to say in the Roman Empire that Caesar is Lord. And often it was a tax you would pay, and you drop the coin and you say, Caesar is Lord, and you were pledging allegiance to Caesar. Caesar is my king. Caesar is my God. Caesar is in control of my life and my destiny and my family. Caesar is Lord. And Paul says the essence of what it means that Jesus is who he is, is to proclaim that Jesus is Lord. And that was a radical subversive act, because by saying that Jesus is Lord, you're saying that Caesar is not. And what you're proclaiming is Jesus is in control of my life. Jesus has everything, all of it. Jesus is Lord. Faith is costly. It costs us everything. Jesus gives us his life. Jesus dies for us so that we take our whole lives, everything that we are in lordship, we surrender all of it and say, God, you're in control. You have my time. You have my future, you have my job, you have my money, you have my kids. I trust all of it to you. You are King, God, Lord, you are Lord. It was this costly thing. Faith 2,000 years ago was not simply this add-on like you check a box in the census. You're like, I guess I'm a Christian. I'll go on Sundays or I'll show up at Christmas. It was not an easy, simple thing. This was a costly act. To proclaim that Jesus was Lord meant social ostracization, right? That you would get kicked out of communities and families, which still happens today in Muslim countries. That it could mean that your business closes because no one frequents you anymore. You are an outcast, a pariah in society. By saying Jesus is Lord, you're saying there's one God, meaning the whole pantheon of Roman gods aren't real, and you're bringing a curse the Romans would feel upon themselves, on their culture, on their town. It was costly that Jesus was Lord. And helping Paul in these missionary journeys as he walked around the Mediterranean, as he proclaimed, Jesus has changed my life, and that Jesus gives his life so that we can give him our life. And in return, what Jesus promises is not religion and rules and burdens. What Jesus promises is that when we give him all of these things, that he returns to us life and life to the full. The life that we crave for, that dissatisfaction, the discontentment, all of it points to the life that ultimately it comes when we surrender our lives to Jesus. It's the great exchange, Martin Luther calls it. And helping Paul in this journey is a guy named Luke. We see Luke show up a few places. First, we see him here in Colossians. Luke, the beloved physician, greets you, as does Demas. So Luke was traveling around with Paul. He's there as he's writing Colossians, along with his dude Demas. And Luke, we're told, is a physician. He also shows up here in 2 Timothy. Luke alone is with me. Paul is writing. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry. So Luke is a companion of Paul. He's a physician. He might have been Paul's private physician, maybe helping him. I think Paul was going blind. He was hunched over. He'd been beaten and whipped and broken. His body was mangled. So Luke is Paul's private physician traveling around with him, proclaiming this message that Jesus is Lord. And somewhere, probably around 60 AD, Luke and potentially Paul together encounter this dude, Theophilus. Theophilus, we don't know a lot about him, but he was probably very wealthy and maybe even a political figure. He was a wealthy, powerful dude. And they encounter Theophilus, and the best we could figure is that Theophilus is just about to give his life to Jesus. He feels this pull. Maybe you felt it. We're like, God is doing something. There's something real here that doesn't make any sense, but I know that God is doing something. And so Theophilus, realizing that following Jesus means it's going to cost him potentially everything. If he's a government official, he might lose his job. He could be ostracized. If he has a powerful company, it could go bankrupt. And he wants to know, hey, these things that you're telling me, did they actually happen? What is true? And so Theophilus puts his money where his mouth is, and he hires Luke. He commissions Luke as a private investigator to go and research these things. Hey, go and figure out if this actually happened, because if it did, if Jesus was raised from the dead, that changes things. And he sends Luke out on this mission that could have been years long. And Luke, as a result, compiles the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. Theophilus privately funds a quarter of the New Testament. So, we are going to be in Luke. We are going to be in Luke for a very long time. We'll take little breaks through it, but we're going to work verse by verse through this Gospel of Luke, which I think you could also call the Gospel for Skeptics. Because Luke wants to investigate, did this actually happen? And he's going to interview eyewitnesses. He's going to talk to the apostles and the disciples. He's going to talk to Mary. He'll go out and try and find the shepherds who were in the fields watching their flocks. He's going to talk to the people who encountered miracles. He's going to find everything that was written and investigate all of it and interview the church and submit that for Theophilus. That's what we have here in the Bible. So that is our intro. Luke chapter 1, verse 1. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us. This paragraph is this marvelous Greek. The first few 4 verses are all one sentence in the Greek. And what he starts off saying is acknowledging that other people have written some things about Jesus. There's lots of things about Jesus swirling around. And it's a really interesting study when you compare Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's this problem that people still can't quite figure out, where Matthew, Mark, and Luke in particular all say some of the exact same things in the exact same way. But Luke has some different things, and Matthew has some different things, and then John's kind of on its own. And our best understanding, and we can debate Q and all of these sort of things, the synoptic problem. My understanding, personally, and I hold this with an open hand, is that Mark wrote the gospel first. That Mark was the first one to write. It's the shortest gospel. It's sort of the quickest to the point. That Mark probably, as an eyewitness to some of these things, wrote the gospel, also a companion of Paul, and that's circulating around. And so Luke does his investigation, and he's using Mark as a source. But we also see there's some things that Matthew and Luke share in common, not in Mark, which means maybe there was another source that they were also using that Luke was pulling from. And then there's stuff that's only in Luke. And I think those are things that he's discovered in his eyewitness sort of interviews, other things that he's bringing in, compiling this gospel, bringing it all together. It's sort of like something happens in the world, a major news event, and you've got ABC, NBC, and CBS all reporting on it, and each of them will take a different view, perspective. They'll say it in a different way, but they're all saying the same thing. It's kind of like what the Gospels are doing. And then John is sort of like the BBC's, just kind of doing his own thing, right? Same idea, just doing his own thing. He's out there. Okay? Gospel of Luke. Verse 2. Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. And so Luke is acknowledging here that he was not an eyewitness. He didn't know Jesus personally. He's living a little bit after the resurrection here, and so he's saying that I have gone to do my best to interview these eyewitnesses and the people who saw the resurrected Jesus, who walked with him, who talked with him, who were healed by him. He's interviewing these people. Verse 3, it seemed good to me also, having followed things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. That word Theophilus, the name Theophilus, means one who loves God. The irony here is that Luke is also writing this, preserving it for all of us who also love God. That this work is being compiled for those of us who love God and want to investigate and understand more about him as he compiles both the work of Luke and his second volume, which is Acts. That you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. Certainty, that asphaleia in the Greek. It doesn't mean like complete firmness in like knowing absolutely everything, right? It's not proof. But it's sort of this firm foundation, that it's no longer rocky. It's stable ground, that you can be stable in your faith. You can have this assurity that these things actually did take place, that we might seem crazy in thinking it, but he's saying, no, have some certainty that these things actually took place. Our faith is not speculation, it's history. Jesus was real. There's no serious historian today who would argue that Jesus was a real person. There are also not only the Gospels written within a generation of Jesus that have been preserved for us, but there are also non-Christian authors. There's Josephus, and there's Tacitus, who are also historians writing about Jesus and the impact he had on people around them in this region. That Jesus happened in history, and the disciples wrote that down. They preserved it, and then each of them died, were persecuted and died for that fact. Renowned 19th century archaeologist actually was a skeptic, and he studied the Gospel of Luke as an archaeologist. And here's what he said: Luke is a historian of the first rank. Not merely are his statements of facts trustworthy, he is possessed of the true historic sense. In short, this author should be placed among the very greatest of historians. That as Luke lays it out, both in his timeline and the people in the events, we can trust that he's actually doing history. Lee Strobel, an author, maybe you've heard of him, was a non-Christian, an atheist, who was investigating. He was a lawyer and an investigator. And so he decided he was going to see if he could make a case for Christianity based on just the evidence. And sure enough, that journey of just studying the gospel, studying the history, studying those facts actually led him to a place of faith. That he realized that simply the history and the evidence in place was enough to lead him to faith. And he wrote books called The Case for Christ and The Case for Faith. C.S. Lewis once said that we have three options when it comes to Jesus. When we read the Gospel of Luke, we have three choices. Number one, either he was a liar. When he straight up just lied about being God and being the resurrection, about being the life, about all these things, that Jesus just straight up lied, somehow tricked people in all of this. But when we read the Gospels, do we see the words of a liar? Not only that, who dies for a lie? Who was beaten, tortured on a cross, heinously executed? Maybe even part of God's reasoning for such a brutal form of execution was to show that Jesus' sincerity in his claim that he was God. No one dies for a lie. The second option C.S. Lewis lays out is that he was a lunatic. He was just a nut job. He was off his rocker, right? Like the crazy, you go downtown and the street corner preachers who are just off on their own, right? That was Jesus. Hey, I'm God, eat my blood, eat my body, drink my flesh. But when we read the words of Jesus, do we get a lunatic? I mean, most of Western society is based on the teachings of Jesus. That 2,000 years later, in completely different cultures, in completely different languages, that the words of Jesus still cut to the core of the human condition and how to find life. Does Jesus really come across as a lunatic? And C.S. Lewis says the third option is that Jesus is who he said he was, that we can trust the truth of that, and that he was the Lord, that he actually is the one that we can say, Jesus is Lord. And listen, it's perfectly normal and healthy to doubt and ask questions. Jesus is not afraid of your questions. And in fact, he invites them. It's part of the reason why Luke exists, is because he wants to share with us. There's reason to believe. Don't believe what the movies have to say. You don't have to unplug your brain and be a moron to be a Christian. It helps, but you don't have to. There is reason to believe that we run the ramp of reason before we take the leap of faith. It's not simply blind faith of just going, I guess I have to trust this, that we can use our senses, our reason, we can use history and philosophy and science to come to see that there is reason to believe. But there comes a moment in all of our lives, though, where Jesus asks us the same question, the most important question that he also asked the disciples. And he asks each of us this morning. He says, who do you say that I am? It's the most important question. Don't answer it aloofly. Do some research. Who do you say that I am? And the correct answer we see in the Gospels is that you're the Lord, that Jesus is Lord, that you are king, you are sovereign, you are ruler. I give you everything, and in return you give me life. That Jesus is Lord. And there's reason to believe. And finally here, what I see in the first 4 verses of Luke is this dude Theophilus, who gave generously for kingdom purpose. Listen, Theophilus could have easily gone, I guess I'll go to church, it's fine, we'll show up Christmas and Easter and I'll call myself a Christian and I won't really be any different in public. He could have done that, but instead of buying his vacation home in Pompeii, which by the way, don't recommend, instead of buying a vacation home in Pompeii, instead of buying a new camel with some rims, he funds Luke for years of ministry. He pays his salary, his travel expenses, so that Luke can compile this work for the kingdom. And listen, I don't think God would have smited Theophilus if he had said, you know what, I'm just going to keep it, I'm going to hoard it, I'm going to buy the vacation home, and I'm going to invest in my retirement. But if Theophilus had done that, we wouldn't have Luke and Acts. And I can't even imagine our Bible not having these 2 works, not having the story of the prodigal son, not having the story of the early church. The reason why we have these, through God's providence, he put it on Theophilus' heart, is that he gave sacrificially. And so the call for us that I wrestle with in this, with that claim that Jesus is Lord of our lives, is he also the Lord over our stuff? Is he also the Lord over our finances? Or are we trying to build our own little kingdom? Listen, if I'm being honest, I grew up in church and I would cringe whenever anybody talked about money. Honestly, I still do. I'm cringing right now. But honestly, if I think back on it, it's because I would say, hey, God, you can have all of this. I'll give you lordship of this. But you can't touch this. It's mine. How dare you? That's not Jesus' Lord. It's not. And I also believe that while we withhold things from Jesus, he also withholds life from us, and we don't live the life that he fully has us to live. And so the call for us is, how will we use the resources that God has given us? And will we invest them in kingdom purposes? What kind of a legacy will we leave? Did Jesus have lordship over the really, really practical, not just what you do with an hour on a Sunday morning, But the really practical, Jesus is saying, am I Lord over your money? The Bible uses this word over and over again. God calls for the first fruit. He says, I want the first fruit. I want the very first. I want the very best. That if we believe in the lordship of Jesus, then he gives us our ability. He gives us our jobs. He sustains us. He gives us breath. All of it is from him. And he says, I want you to give me back the first fruit, the best. And what often happens in my life, sitting here with you, receiving this, in my life, in the Israelites' lives, is we give them the leftovers, the scraps. Right? We make dinner for ourselves, and then there's the table scraps. And we're like, here you go, God, and for you, a little something, a little something for you. And in the Old Testament, God gets actually really angry that in the sacrifices Israel is giving, they're just giving the junk to God. Are we giving God the best of our time, the best of our resources, the best of us for kingdom work, the thing that will actually last, that for 2,000 years, these works have been changing lives? We could not count the number of lives changed by the story of the prodigal son, by the book of Acts, by Luke's work. God says, what will you do with what I have given you? As we as a church, well, we talked about, it's just timely as we start into Luke. Listen, I don't talk about money every week. It's just, this is the week we're in. Last week, we set our budget. We voted on it as members. We've been praying about it. And the budget, all of it funnels down to one goal. We want to see 15 baptisms this year. 15 people's lives changed. Everything else exists for that. Because hopefully this time next year, we can have a party together knowing that we all played a part in that. But the reality is that God says, okay, I hear that prayer. What are you willing to do for it? Because if we're honest, we want to pray and we want God just to magically happen. So we can go, yay, and not have any skin in the game. God's saying, okay, I hear that prayer. What are you going to do? We want to have a presence at Sierra College. We want to have more youth ministry. We want to invest in our youth. We want to start a preteen night where we want to invest in our Sunday morning. We want to get in a new building so we have a home that people don't feel like it's the secret church where no one knows we exist, right? All of those things take the generosity of God's people. And I think this morning, I think it's timely where God is saying, what kind of a legacy do we want to leave with our time, with our talent, with our treasures? Theophilus sets this amazing example for us. God says, will you give me the first fruits and trust that I'm not trying to withhold from you and I'm not trying to make your life suck. I'm not trying to deprive you. I want to give you life. Will you release this and have this faith that my way is actually better than yours? That's been the story of my life. And as a church, are we willing to do that as we walk into this year? Having this legacy view that our lives can be about something far larger than just what we do with our days. Let me pray.